It all started with one seat, just one seat on an airplane that would change everything. The cabin lights glowed softly as passengers boarded the massive aircraft. This wasn't just any flight, it was the early morning international route from New York to London, packed with business travelers, tourists, and a few wealthy elites. Among those passengers was a young girl named Amara Williams, only 10 years old. But don't be fooled, Amara wasn't an ordinary child. She was the daughter of one of the world's most successful tech billionaires, and she was traveling alone in first class, supervised by flight attendants. Amara had grown up in luxury, but she was humble, polite, and always smiling. Her father had taught her, respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat people. And Amara carried that lesson everywhere. As she walked down the jet bridge, her little red dress swaying and her braids neatly tied back, passengers and crew couldn't help but smile at her confidence. She was holding a small designer backpack, but her eyes sparkled with innocence. The flight attendant guided her to her first-class seat, 1A, the best seat on the plane. It was spacious, right by the window, with a view of the sunrise just beginning to peek over the horizon, but when Amara arrived, her smile faded. Someone was already sitting there. A man, white, mid-50s, dressed in a sharp business suit, was reclined comfortably in her seat, sipping champagne that had just been poured. He looked like he owned the world, but his eyes were filled with arrogance. Amara blinked, politely checking her ticket again. "Excuse me, sir. I think you're in my seat. This is 1A. The man didn't even look up at her at first. Instead, he gave a mocking laugh. "Sweetheart, first class isn't for kids. Why don't you go find your parents back in economy?" Gasps came from nearby passengers. A couple sitting across the aisle glanced at each other, uncomfortable. The flight attendant stepped forward quickly. "Sir, this young lady is indeed assigned to seat 1A. May I see your boarding pass?" The man leaned back smugly, waving his hand dismissively. "Do you know who I am? I'm a platinum executive flyer. I've flown more miles than this child has eaten breakfasts. Clearly, there's been some mistake." Amara's small hands tightened around her ticket, but her voice was steady. "There's no mistake. My boarding pass says 1A. Finally, he looked at her properly. He sneered. "Listen, little girl, first class is for people who earned it. Not spoiled brats playing dress-up." The words cut like a knife. Amara's eyes watered, but she stood her ground. She wasn't about to let this man take what was hers, not because of her wealth, but because it was about dignity. The flight attendant tried again, her voice firmer now. "Sir, if you do not vacate this seat, I will have to involve security." The man smirked, crossing his arms. "Go ahead. Let's see who they side with, me, or a child who doesn't belong here." The tension thickened. Passengers were now whispering, phones out, recording the standoff. What began as a small argument over a seat was spiraling into something much bigger, and then Amara said something that silenced the entire cabin. She lifted her chin, looked him directly in the eye, and said, "My father owns the company that built this airplane." The man's jaw dropped. The passengers gasped louder. The flight attendant's eyes widened. Amara wasn't bragging. She wasn't showing off. She was telling the truth. Her father's aerospace company was one of the top contractors in the aviation industry. In fact, the airline itself had purchased dozens of planes from his firm. The man's mocking grin faltered, but his pride kept him glued to the seat. "Nice story, kid. But that doesn't mean you get special treatment." But at that exact moment, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a slight delay due to a seating issue in the first-class cabin. Please remain patient as we resolve this matter." The plane wasn't moving. The entire flight was grounded because of one arrogant passenger. and this was only the beginning. The atmosphere grew tense. People in business class craned their necks, curious. Even passengers in economy began murmuring when they realized the flight hadn't taken off yet. The flight attendant now had backup. 2 more crew members approached, along with the head purser. "Sir, you need to move to your assigned seat immediately," the purser said firmly. The man shook his head, his arrogance unshaken. "I'm not moving. I paid good money for this ticket, and I'm not about to let a kid take my spot." "But sir," the purser replied, holding out his boarding pass, "your assigned seat is 12C. That's economy plus. Not first class." Laughter erupted from a few passengers. The man's face flushed red with embarrassment, but instead of standing down, he grew angrier. "This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? I'm a top executive at one of the biggest corporations in New York. I won't be humiliated in front of a child." That was it. The captain himself came out of the cockpit. Tall, commanding, and calm, he walked straight to the scene. "Sir, you are delaying the flight. You have 2 choices: move to your correct seat peacefully, or leave the aircraft. Security is already on standby." The man hesitated, his pride battling his fear. But before he could respond, Amara spoke again, her voice soft but steady. "My father always told me that people show their true worth not by how much money they make, but how they treat others. You could have just said sorry and moved. But you chose to be mean." The cabin fell silent. Even those in the back rows were leaning forward, straining to hear the child's words. The man looked around, realizing that every single pair of eyes in that airplane was now judging him. His arrogance crumbled. He muttered under his breath, grabbed his bag, and stormed toward economy, but as he stomped away, one passenger couldn't resist. "Enjoy seat 12C, they shouted, and the cabin burst into laughter. Amara finally sat in her rightful seat, her small frame sinking into the plush first-class chair. The flight attendant smiled warmly at her, offering her juice and making sure she was comfortable, but just as the plane prepared to push back, the captain's voice came again over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to disruptive passenger behavior, this flight will remain grounded until security clears the situation. We apologize for the delay." The arrogant man had continued arguing in the back, refusing to sit quietly. He insulted the crew, shouted about being disrespected, and even tried to grab another passenger seat. Within minutes, airport security entered the aircraft and escorted him off the plane. As he was dragged away, his last words echoed bitterly, "This isn't over." But to everyone else on board, it already was. Justice had been served. The passengers erupted in applause, some even cheering for Amara. She blushed but smiled shyly, waving a little. The black woman sitting nearby leaned forward and whispered, "You were so brave. Don't ever forget that." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doors closed, and the aircraft began taxiing. The flight was back on track, and yet, that one moment had changed everything, because later that day, when the story hit social media, videos from passengers went viral, the world discovered the truth. A billionaire's daughter had stood her ground with grace against arrogance, and the man who mocked her. He became a global symbol of entitlement and disrespect. His company faced backlash, and he eventually lost his job. Meanwhile, Amara became a hero. Not because of her wealth, but because of her courage, humility, and dignity. The moral was clear: respect isn't about status. It's about kindness, and sometimes, even the smallest voices can ground the biggest egos.